Tiger fans, what's going on, guys? So, no, I'm a day late for the video. So, holiday, I wanted to watch more of the games before we came on here. So, this video was something I've been wanting to make and something I have been talking about making for about 3 weeks now. It's a video I want to call the real timeline of the rebuild, because there are so many misconceptions and so much stuff I read on the internet every single day about people who are they just hear garbage that's spewed on the radio and read garbage that people who want to get clicks talk about on the team. What's going on with the team with the rebuild. Now, I know people want to consider me an Al Avila apologist and all this other stuff. Listen, I wrote down a whole list just so I stayed on track and everything, so we can go over this rebuild properly and talk about everything that's going on so far and everything that's going on. I'm dead neutral as possible, and I'm going to give it to you dead neutral as possible. But I don't want to, I'm just tired of hearing about how this rebuild's 7 years long and how bad of a job Avila's done and everything else. Before we do that, let's hurry up and touch on what's happened since my last video for the Tigers. Wise, this isn't going to take very long. Basically, they lost 2 or 3 to the Royals. The only cool part was Riley Green hit his first major league home run, which was a walk-off home run in the 9th. Him and Victor Reyes go back-to-back. Other than that, the rest of the series was unmemorable as hell. Spencer Torkelson had his first home run since May 18th. Awesome. Cody Clemens hit his second career home run. Sweet. And the Tigers took the first game of the doubleheader against the Guardians today. Scope had 4 hits. Awesome. Great. Wonderful. Now, let's get on to the actual rebuild. So, I'm going to show you guys my notes. I started in 2012 and left in 22. And the reason why I started in 2012 is that was the World Series. So let's go year by year, record by record. So 88 and 74 World Series, 93 and 69 they lost to the Red Sox in the ALCS. They should have won the World Series that year, but that's another video. 14, 90 and 72, that was the last good year. Now, 14 is a super significant year in the rebuild, and the reason why I say that is because in 14 a lot of things happened. They couldn't re-sign Max Scherzer. They offered him that contract, and Max Scherzer declined it because they thought he was going to get more money with another team if he had a good year, which he did. That was a major piece lost. They also, in 14, traded for David Price to help them try to win the World Series, to get to the World Series since 12. And that year, they also traded Doug Fister to the Nationals for Steve Lombardozzi and Robbie Ray. And then 15, this was the signs of the chips in the armor, because I can remember in 2014 saying that 2015 was, or 2000, I can remember in saying in 2014 that 2014 was pretty much it, because after 14 it was going to be really hard to be as competitive as they were from 11 to 14. Also, in 2014, they re-signed Victor Martinez to his a contract extension for 4 more years. That is absolutely huge in the impact of the rebuild. So 15, 74, and 87, but they thought they were going to be competitive. They weren't. 16, they went for it. Now, this was Al Avila's first year. Dave Dombrowski got fired on August 5th of 2015, and that's when Al Avila took over. That is the official start of Al Avila's tenure. Okay, so 2015, the whole reason why he got fired is in 2000 they went for it hard in 2014. You got to remember, they traded for David Price, they traded Austin Jackson to the Mariners, they traded Drew Smyly to the Rays. It was a 3-team trade, a couple other guys involved in it. We got Price because they were going for it. You got to remember, they got swept out of the playoffs by the Baltimore Orioles that year in the first round, and that was the last time they were in the playoffs. And that was also Brad Ausmus's first year, who Dave Dombrowski brought on. Now, in that time span, all moves that affect the timeline of the rebuild. They traded Fister, and they ended up dealing Ray right away. He started a few games, and the Tigers ended up dealing him to the Diamondbacks. They also traded for Alfredo Simon. They traded Eugenio Suarez for it because they had Jose Iglesias, and they thought that Jose Iglesias was going to be there for the next 6-7 years. He wasn't. They traded Eugenio Suarez. And what does Suarez go on to do? He ended up being a really good player for the Reds for about a 5-year stretch. This guy almost hit 50 home runs. Huge move to the rebuild, because that was one of the few young players that the Tigers had actually picked up and signed out of I think he was an international draft pick, and picked up and signed that would have been someone that would have been an everyday contributor. Because you got to realize, and we're going to get into the farm system part of this here in a second, you got to realize the Tigers farm was so bad in this time span. And Eugenio Suarez and Nick Castellanos could have been two guys they could have built around to help keep the years that we've had over the last 5 years from happening as quick. So huge moves that Dave Dombrowski did that screwed the Tigers towards why the rebuild is taking so long. Signed Victor Martinez to an abysmal extension on a career year when he almost won MVP. They traded Eugenio Suarez for Alfredo Simon, who was absolutely terrible. He was a fluke with the Reds. He had a half a good season, made an All-Star game, and he was absolutely awful. They traded Corey Knebel for K-Rod, and he was absolutely terrible. Also in that time span, we'll get into, they traded a couple of their first-round picks of the early 2010s, like Jonathan Crawford and Jake Thompson, away as well. They ended up, when they got David Price, David Price was supposed to be a guy that after he didn't work out in 2015 when they were bad because the Tigers had a bunch of good players on a crappy team. Because 15, you also got to remember, they were like a fringe 500 team where they went into Boston in July and ended up getting swept. And I actually got videos on here you could go back and watch if you want to see what was going on exactly, because I was still making videos really consistent. They went into July and got swept by the Red Sox, which pushed them to trade David Price to the Blue Jays, and they got 3 players. One was reliever, it was like Jair Laborde, never did anything, didn't matter. And it was supposed to be Norris and Matt Boyd. Dave Dombrowski pickup. Mind you, this is Dave Dombrowski. Daniel Norris was the centerpiece of that trade. He was supposed to be the next big thing. He was supposed to help this Tigers pitching that was already starting to get thin because they didn't have Max Scherzer. They traded David Price. Justin Verlander, you got to remember, at this point in time, Justin Verlander was hurt, and he wasn't nearly as good. This is when he went through that 2-year thing with the core injury, and that he had missed a few months. And he was not the Justin Verlander that he ended up becoming in 2017 again when they dealt him. Matt Boyd ended up becoming the only guy on that team out of that trade that did anything. Daniel Norris was constantly hurt. And Daniel Norris was a high prospect with the Blue Jays, and he'd already made his major league debut, and so had Matt Boyd. And they were supposed to come up and help a barren farm system that didn't have many prospects come up and try to keep their window open a little bit. And this is 2015. So that is Dave Dombrowski's stuff. They had 4 competitive years from 11 to 14. Dombrowski goes and trades Corey Knebel, goes and trades Jake Thompson, goes and trades, now Jake Thompson sucks, but I'm just saying he was a big draft pick for them, trades Corey Knebel, Jake Thompson, Eugenio Suarez, trades David Price to try to help them jumpstart, get a little bit of a farm system because they were really bad. We're going to get into that too. Signs Victor Martinez to a bad contract extension, which he shouldn't have did. Ends up dealing Robbie Ray right off the rip. So all this stuff dramatically affects the timeline because he went and took a farm system that was horribly ranked already and had no team and had no talent, and took what talent was there and dumped it for crappy players. K-Rod was terrible. Like I said, Matt Boyd should have been traded, and that's an Al Avila thing we'll talk about. Matt Boyd should have been traded. Daniel Norris never worked out. They had that Victor Martinez contract, which screwed them for years to come. Eugenio Suarez becomes a superstar at the Reds. He could have helped them a lot. So this is all Dave Dombrowski's fault to that point. Let's finish throughout this. So 16, Al Avila's first full year. They were going for it. 17, so 86, 75, 17, 64, 98, 18, 64, 98, 19, 47, and 114, 23, and 35, and 2020 shortened season, 77, 85 last year. So now we get to 2016 where Al Avila takes over. And this is where the whole timeline becomes skewed because people think when Al Avila took over for the Tigers that they were rebuilding right away. No, they were not. The whole reason why Dave Dombrowski was fired is because they had a team that won the division in 2014. Oh, and Dave Dombrowski also hired Brad Ausmus, who was a horrible hire. And Avila's got one of those on his thing too. Because like I said, Avila's not out of the water on this. You guys think I'm an Avila apologist, and I'm just going to sit here and try to say how good of a job he's doing, and he's like, they're doing amazing. No, it's not rainbows and butterflies. I do defend Avila on this channel quite a bit because I do think he has done a good job, and you'll see my points, but he's not safe from criticism in this either. So he got fired because in 2014, they won the division. They should not have hired Brad Ausmus. in that time span, because he was a young rookie manager that had no idea he was supposed to be this analytical guy, and the Tigers were supposed to be shifting towards more analytics. BS, no BS, it sucked. But anyways, so they were supposed to be good in 14 and try to go back to where they were in 2013. But you got to realize that core was aging. They went all for it. They had already traded players, like I said, Doug Fister and everything else, and then it was the last thing of Max Scherzer. But it didn't work out. They got swept out because of Brad Ausmus's horrible bullpen management and Jabba Chamberlain blowing up on the mound. So 2015, they came in with expectations to be competitive, but it didn't happen. Like I said, they were playing in Boston. They were right around 500. They get swept out of Boston, and Dave Dombrowski's like, all right, here we go. We don't really have any kind of farm system to even trade to try to give us the bat or the pitcher we need to be over on top. Because in 2015, they were a team full of good players. You got to remember, they had dealt Rick Porcello at in the offseason. They had Yoenis Cespedes. And now, mind you, that was a trade that they did make to get Michael Fulmer. So that was a good Dave Dombrowski move. He kind of saved the bacon on that one. But they had Yoenis Cespedes. They had, JD Martinez. They ended up picking up JD Martinez. Let's see. Victor Martinez was still a good bat. David Price had pitched well that year. Justin Verlander was hurt. He had missed like the first 2 months of the season and whatnot like that. So they had a lot of talent, but they were a really extremely underperforming team. And for a team that had just won 4 straight division titles, had gone to the ALCS 2 of the last previous 4 years, or 3 of the last previous 4 years, I should say, they were showing signs of the cracks were showing. No farm system, no talent to replenish this older talent with a clearly aging core, because they had guys like Johnny Peralta was also there, Delman Young was also there, and they didn't have anyone. I mean, Nick Castellanos was pretty much it. I mean, you got to understand during this farms the time that the kind of players that Dave Dombrowski was drafting was just right-handed pitchers who couldn't throw strikes. Like if you look at most of his draft picks, like Jonathan Crawford and Jake Thompson, Corey Knebel, I think I just said Jonathan Crawford. Most of these guys were guys that were big right-handers that couldn't throw strikes and never really stood a chance of being frontline starters ever in the major leagues. So a lot of people were pissed off at the direction the Tigers were going, because they had so much success since 2006. There's only a couple of dud years in there, and then you go from 11 to 14, and then you would have the pitching staff. I mean, they had the last 3 reigning Cy Young Award winners in 2014, Verlander, Scherzer, and Price. So they were like, nope, Dave, it's got to go. We need a new direction. Clearly, we have no farm system. This core is aging. We need a new voice. And that's why they brought Avila on, because Avila was Dave Dombrowski's right-hand man. So when Avila came on, they had full expectations of competing in 2016. If you look at his comments after they hired Al Avila, I don't remember this verbatim, he clearly said that Tigers are not in a rebuild. He said this in his press conference in 2015. They expect to compete. That's what he said in 2015. They expect to compete. So 2016, they go out, and here's the first part of Al Avila's blunders. They signed Jordan Zimmermann to an awful 5-year contract that turned out awful. 2020 hindsight, it was awful, but the writings were on the walls, because Zimmermann was about to be, I think he was 30 or 29. He was right there, about to be on the wrong side of 30, either or which way. And he had already had arm injuries in his career before, and there was writing on the wall that this was not going to be a good signing. They signed Zimmermann. And then they went out and they got Justin Upton. So they went and pushed the envelope to try to compete again, because they weren't that far gone from being basically ruling a division for 4 years. So they go out and sign Upton and Zimmermann. Zimmermann was hurt almost right away. Should have shown. We've seen the writing on the wall. Daniel Norris gets hurt almost right away. Matt Boyd, whatever, comes up, and he was a serviceable starter. And then Michael Fulmer dominates, has an amazingly good rookie year, wins Rookie of the Year. He was a big contributor that season. And this is one spot where Avila gets some discredit towards him of why the rebuild is taking the time period. Now, that it has. Now, 16 and 17. 16 they were supposed to compete. They missed the division by losing to the Braves. Two of the last, I think they had to win one game and they lost. They got swept out by the Atlanta Braves at the end of the year 2016 because they were trying to force a game 163, and they got swept out by the Braves, who were the last place team in the NL East or fourth place team in the NL East, and it was pathetic. And they couldn't win one single game to force a 163 to try to win the division, and they lose 86-75. So 2017, rebuild has not started yet. Okay, 2017, they were going to try to compete again. So this year at the trade deadline is finally when they went off and said, okay, we got to start trading guys away. Clearly, it ain't working. JD Martinez has become one of the best right-handed hitters in the American League. You know, our pitching has not developed the next wave of guys who we thought were going to be good, like Norris and Boyd and Andrew Oliver, all these dudes. They have not developed the way we thought. Our farm system isn't producing anyone to come up and try to help out. We got a bunch of aging veterans. By then, Miguel Cabrera started getting hurt. By then, Justin Verlander was pretty much the only pitcher they had on the rotation that was worth anything. So that is when they went at the 2017 deadline, and they started to tear it down. One of Avila's awful moves when he traded JD Martinez. I can't even remember who he traded JD Martinez for because I know not a single one of those prospects exists. It was a guy named Alcantara. I remember that. He essentially got a bunch of shortstops for JD Martinez, and I don't think he might have got a pitcher. I can't remember. None of those guys ever affected the Tigers. I think that Alcantara kid was on the Tigers for maybe 30 games, and last time I remember he was on the Cubs, and he got released. It was horrible. Bad trade by Avila. Then he traded Justin Verlander. Now, this Justin Verlander trade, it looked good when they did it because they were not going to win. They wanted to try to cash in on Verlander's value. I was high, super high, because I think Verlander only had like a year left on his contract. They wanted to try to cash in. They knew they were about to enter this rebuild. They were already getting rid of guys. Like they were about to dump Justin Upton off on the Angels. And get rid of guys like Ian Kinsler and whatnot like that because they knew they were about to go full-blown teardown. They had tried for 2 years in 16 and 17 to win and be a competitive team again and try to utilize the talent that Dave Dombrowski had put there, but it just was not working. The core was old. They had nobody in the farm system to replenish any of this talent. And then the free agents they signed, like Upton and Zimmerman, like Upton had a couple of good years with the Tigers, but Zimmerman was terrible. And then some of these other trades that Dave Dombrowski had made for getting rid of some of this talent that they had, it depleted their farm system. They literally had no one there, and they had no talent to make trades. So 17 is the start. Midway 17 is the 100% start of the rebuild. July of 2017. Okay, so that means that this month, so you got 18, 19, 21, 22. We are only 4 years into this rebuild as of this month because they were trying to be competitive in 2017. They went in and they were not a good team even with all those players, and they full-blown tore it down in 2017, which is why they had a 64-98 record. Then you look, the last couple years of the rebuild, I don't need to go into it, was horrible. 2018, they had a bunch of nobodies. I mean, over from 18 to 20, it was some of the worst rosters I've ever saw. Whether it was Jordy Mercer, Josh Harrison, Tyson Ross, Matt Moore, they were just so low on depth, they were getting anyone. I remember they got Randy Wolf. They traded for Randy Wolf. They had signed C.J. Cron, just a bunch of different random crappy veterans. I can't even remember all of them. Dustin Peterson. I was going back and watching some of my videos during like the peak rebuild years, especially like that 2019 year. And just some of the names and looking back at some of the rest, you're like, wow, that guy played for the Tigers. It was really, really bad. So July of 17 is the official start of the rebuild. So now the Justin Verlander trade, like I had said, was a bad move by Avila for the trade in hindsight because they had traded for Jake Rogers, Daz Cameron, and Franklin Perez. And Franklin Perez, when the Tigers had traded for him, was a super, super highly touted prospect. You go back and look at like prospect rankings of 2017, he's like top 20. He was really up there. But as we know, he's down in the Gulf Coast League right now, and he can't even get through 4 innings. He's a bust. Like Franklin Perez was nothing. Daz Cameron, we know what he is. He hasn't really contributed much to the Tigers. He's had a couple of big home runs, but we know what he is. He's a quad A player. That's it. And Jake Rogers had Tommy John surgery, and Jake Rogers has really only had some half a season of success. And we haven't seen him try to do anything because he's never been really anything with the stick. So that trade was a bust. So far over the JD, the Verlander trade were two horrible trades. And a lot of these guys, he just dumped to dump because he was trying to get rid of contracts. He wasn't really doing much to really replenish the farm system because you got to understand, when Avila first started tearing us down in 2017, they were just trying to move players. He had to wait for that VMart contract to go out. He was now stuck with the Zimmerman contract he was never going to be able to get rid of because they were in a full-blown rebuild and he sucked. They somehow dumped Justin Upton's contract out of it because I think J-Up had that opt-out too that they were about to do. So they dumped that J-Up contract. So now he's stuck with some bad contracts, trying to dump it, and he was just dumping his players to dump them because he wasn't going to resign them, and he were trying to get something for it. Now, the quality of player he got from it wasn't very good. I'll fully admit, people want to make that point about those two particular trades. 100% agree. Avila did a shit job. He did not get anything back for those players of any kind of value. The only trade that Avila has made to this point that's been any bit of value is when they got Isaac Paredes and Jeimer Candelario for Justin Wilson and his kid, Alex. That's been about it because Candelario has been the only everyday starter out of the majority of his trades. And obviously they traded Meadows for Isaac Paredes, and that's a whole other video. All these people thinking that Isaac Paredes is now Babe Ruth and Austin Meadows is a bust, even though Meadows has the bigger, better track record than more than of a month and a half of Isaac Paredes at-bats. So I'd be willing to bet if we look in 2 years and compare when Meadows' contract's over to what the Rays got from Paredes versus what we get from Meadows, I guarantee you the Tigers got the better end of that deal. I'm going to go with track record over a guy who's had a fluke half a season of being hurt. So now we get into the farm system aspect of this. So now we set the tone. Dave Dombrowski had a bunch of bad trades, traded away crucial talent pieces that went on to other places, young controllable pieces that went on to other places that ended up being good, that really screwed the Tigers for the coming years after 2014. They couldn't re-sign Max Scherzer, all that other stuff. And then the official start of the rebuild is July of 17. So now we look at the farm system, and this is where I think that Avila has done a good job, and I think why people this year are frustrated about the rebuild and the direction of it. But this is where Avila has excelled, and he's putting the Tigers in a position where they're going to be better, even though the results don't say it this year. Okay, so during the average, we're going to say the average minor leaguer takes 3 years before they make an impact on the major league level. So that's why I'm going from 12 up. So in 2012, we're just doing solely first-round picks until Al Avila takes over. Dave Dombrowski drafted Jake Thompson, who I think finally just made his major league debut like a couple years ago at the Phillies. He's anything. Jonathan Crawford, I don't think he's even pitched in the big leagues. He might have, I don't know. Derek Hill. So Derek Hill, we all know it. He's still been on the Tiger. He's still a Tiger. Obviously, we know Derek Hill, fourth outfielder, but he hasn't been anything. I've said this many times, but he compared him to Torrey Hunter. He's never going to be anything. He's not anything, and he's going to be forever a 4A player coming up enough from Pluto. But anyways, that's a Dave Dombrowski pick. Bo Barrows. He lasted not even a half a season with the Tigers 2 years ago, went to the Minnesota Twins, and now he's going to forever be known for just throwing up on a mound. That's all he's going to be famous for. And this is all that Dave Dombrowski got. These four players were supposed to be over from 12 to 15. These are supposed to be the guys that were going to affect you from, because if you draft in 12, it takes 3 years, 16, 17, 18, and 19. These four guys, if they were any good in the first round, should have helped your franchise in those years' time. And none of them did. It took Derek Hill till 2019, or it was either 2019 or 2020 to make his major league debut. Same with Babe Burrows. I think it was 2020. And he did nothing. And then Jonathan Crawford and Jake Thompson didn't even do anything. So now, Al Avila comes, and the Tigers farm system rankings in that time span. 13th in 2012, 27th, 30th, over from 12 to 15. Now, we get Al Avila's first full year in 2016. First round pick, Matt Manning. I know he's hurt, but we all know that name. He's already come up in the big leagues and been a contributor, and he would have been a contributor this year, and he was pitching a lot better, but he's already pitched more innings than Jonathan Crawford ever did or Jake Thompson did in the major leagues. So, Matt Manning. Number 2, 2017, his second year, first full year, Alex Faedo. We all know that name. He's an everyday starter. He pitches every 5th day for us. And he's had a couple of starts his last 2 times out, but he's come up and done a damn good job for being a rookie in his first stint in the big leagues. Already pitched more innings than Crawford or Jake Thompson has. Second year as GM. Third year, Casey Mize. Yeah, I know. He's got Tommy John, whatever. But that's such a common surgery. I already made this video. But he's already come up and been a contributor for a year and a half. And like I said, more than any of those other dudes that Dave Dombrowski drafted. So that's 3 guys that have already that Al Avila's drafted that's already affected the Tigers. 4th guy, let's see, Riley Green. And I know he was a higher pick. He's a 5th pick. But he could have picked one of the other 4 guys. Riley Green so far has been the best of the 4. So, Bobby Witt was selected ahead of him, and Bobby Witt's pretty damn good too. But for the Tigers, Riley Green, like I said, has been really good. Selected Riley Green. He's an everyday regular, already affecting the team. So there's now 4 guys that Avila's drafted that's up in the big leagues and that's helping right now. And then the 5th guy is Spencer Torkelson. That dude right there. So now 5 guys he has drafted since 2016 that have all come up and finally made their impact on the Tigers in some way, somehow. Now, have they made the impact yet that we hope they make? No. I mean, it's still kind of early, and I get it. It's still kind of early in sample size, but my point is these dudes that Dave Dombrowski drafted did nothing for the team. Their farm system was terrible. From the time Al Avila took over, their farm system went 27th, 25th, 15th, 6th, 5th, 5th, and they're ranked 7th right now in the major leagues. He's done something. Everything that's going on the major league level so far, I get why people are mad because they think it's unimpressive and the team is not living up to expectations. I get all that because we thought that they were going to be better. I thought they were going to be an 81 team. Clearly, that's not going to be the case. I get why people are frustrated, but it's what's going on at the core. It's the foundation that has been built that's there. Prospects are prospects. I get it. It's not 100% kind of thing that they're ever going that this team is going to be, the next Cubs or Houston Astros. But you know something? At least the Tigers tore it down and they've done something where they've actually put talent in their minor league system. You have to realize that now they've lost Riley Green, Matt Manning, Tarek Skubal, Casey Mize, all to the major leagues. Their prospect statuses have now graduated. But they still have enough talent in their minor league system that they're considered on all these farm system rankings I got were either from Minor League Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, or ESPN. Credited sites. To credit them as a top 10 farm system right now with all those guys already graduated prospect status, that goes to show you the core foundation of how this team, how it's built, how much talent is just sitting down there. We saw today Garrett Hill. This guy was really good in the minor leagues at every single level. If you look at his numbers, comes up 6 innings today, pitches great. We saw Joey Wentz contribute this year. There's been 9 different Tigers players this year come up out of the minor leagues and contribute to this team some which way how. Dave Dombrowski couldn't even get one of these guys. One to be an everyday contributor, to be on this roster. So you wonder why the team is so bad in 2022, and you wonder why the rebuild's taking so damn long. Look at the crap he had to pull him out of. Look at how much Dave Dombrowski put Al Avila behind the 8 ball. Look at all the crap that Avila had to freaking clean up. Now, some of it's his fault. Some of the shit he's stepping in up to his ankles is shit that he laid. He's 100% not without blame on this. With some of the bad contracts he signed and some of the bad trades that he's made, that's also stunted the rebuild. But if you look at the core foundation of the players that are there, players that he's drafted that are now everyday contributors, that are now at least somewhat helping this team on an everyday basis, he's done that. He's the one that put Hinch in place. And Hinch brought someone like Chris Fetter. That's been and then helped the development of these young pitchers. That's Al Avila. And what I don't understand is people want to give certain coaches credit, but they don't want to credit the people that put the coaches in the place. It goes hand in hand. It's not one without the other. If one of these, you can't just say, yeah, this coach is good, but the other ones don't. No. Hinch and Fetter, they're hand in hand. Who do you think goes through this stuff together? It's those 2 guys. Now, mind you, another thing to knock against Avila, he hired Ryan Garnhire, who was a loser. He was not a good manager with the Twins his last 5 years with that team. They were terrible. He had his last 5 years in the big leagues, all his teams won at least 90, lost at least 90 games. And that was a move I was dead set against. And that's another knock against Al Avila. That's so far what he's done as general manager. Bringing in Ron Gardenhire, which was an absolute horrible move by him. I thought it should have been someone else from the get-go because he's bringing in an old school manager with a team that was about to have a bunch of young guys and a guy that can't manage even good players. You know, maybe back in the early 2000s he could, but toward the end he couldn't. But that's my point with all this. Everyone wants to knock the rebuild and knock the progress and knock where they're at, but you have to realize where it started from. You have to realize how bad the farm system was. You have to realize the big underlying trades that Dave Dombrowski made of talent that went on to be successful other places that screwed them for the future of those years from like 16 to 19 that they were supposed to be there. You have to realize the guys didn't pan out. Nick Castellanos never was the superstar guy that he was supposed to be. And they deal Suarez, and they deal Doug Fister, who was a really big contributor for a guy who ends up becoming a Cy Young, and they don't even have him for a year. And they deal him. Dave Dombrowski did that. And then Al Avila, doesn't trade Michael Fulmer when he should have traded him. And doesn't trade Matt Boyd when he should have traded him. And stuff like that. So there's all sorts of things for the reason why we hear what we are today in 2022. But at least they had some kind of direction, some kind of purpose, and they weren't in perpetuity of being constantly in the middle. Because you can be like Al Avila did and tore the whole thing down. Yeah, not every move he's made has been amazingly good, but at least they've drafted well. At least the players that they've drafted have made it to the major leagues. At least, they've put some good talent in place. Like I said, they've had all these prospects graduate, but there's still so much depth in the team, like Christian Santana and Roberto Campos and Parker Meadows. I mean, there's so many good players. Ty Madden is down there, and he's done really well this year. Colt Keith. There's so many players down there that could be top 100 prospects in the next year. But at least they weren't like the Angels. Like, look, if you want to be like the Angels, where you have literally the two of the best players in the entire major leagues with Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout, and they have continually spent on free agents, whether from Mike Trout's career, whether it been Albert Pujols, whether it been Josh Hamilton, whether it been C.J. Wilson, and they could not, and they can't draft. They can't draft any kind of starting pitching. All they do is get a bunch of injury-prone fifth starters on their team to try to fill out the rotation every single year. None of the players that they've really drafted have been anything. Like Joe Adell was a top 5 prospect in the MLB, and he hasn't panned out to be anything so far. And they can't find anybody to help. And they literally go out and sign Shohei Ohtani. You got the guy who's one of the amazingly good pitcher and an amazingly good hitter. He literally does it on both sides of the ball. And Mike Trout has won 3 MVPs. He's outwarred Hall of Fame players already. And he's having another career year. And their record's not much better than ours. So at least, yeah, we're bad. But at least the Tigers have drafted and have finally put some players in place and built like some kind of a concrete foundation versus being continually stuck in the middle where the Angels are, where they're constantly trying to go out and spend over their problems. And that's all Dave Dombrowski would want to do. And he tried to do that with Philadelphia. Just try to spend over their problems. Look what he did with the Red Sox. He was lucky that the Red Sox previous regime had built such a damn good farm system and they had so many of their players pan out because he went there and absolutely made their farm system barren as hell, did win a World Series, and give him credit for that, and then left it with nothing there. And luckily, this next regime, Chaim Bloom, has done a good job. But they also had a lot of good players they had drafted before Dave Dombrowski got there, because he wouldn't have drafted anyone. He just drafted to deal them. And then look what he's done with the Phillies. They're screwed this year. Another year where the Phillies were supposed to be a playoff contending team, they're screwed. Now, mind you, their bullpen's really bad, and they've had a lot of injuries. Like Bryce Harper is going to be done here for a while now. But look where they're sitting at. So at least with this rebuild, they've put a foot forward, and they picked a direction, and they've stayed on the gas pedal of trying to draft. And if you can't see it with your eyes at this point, you're blind. Look how many starters they've gone through. Like literally all these guys. And they haven't had to make a single trade for a veteran starter or go and get someone. They've literally brought up minor leaguer after minor leaguer after minor leaguer to fill these spots on the rotation. And they've done a good enough job for being rookies. Bo Brisky's done a good enough job for being a rookie. Alex Faedo's done a good enough job for being a rookie. Ronnie Garcia's done a good enough job. Really, the only one that was bad was Rodriguez. That was really about it. That's really been about it out of all the rookie starters. To have a 4.5, 4.3 ERA as a rookie, you're good. That's perfectly fine for someone who's in the big leagues for the first time facing these pitchers. If this was Dave Dombrowski, they would have never been able to fill this much kind of depth with rookie starter pitchers like they have this year. And there's more still down there on the farm. The Tigers have drafted so much pitching, and I only have put the first rounds because I didn't want to put every single player from every single draft. Like, that's just stupid. But they have drafted so much pitching over the last 4 years, 5 years, because of this. Because pitching prospects are so volatile. They're one of the hardest assets to hit on and one of the hardest assets to accrue. And that's what they've done. And now, mind you, like, if you want to knock their positional player depth, okay, I'll give you that. You know, they didn't draft positional players as well as they definitely did pitchers. So if you want to knock Avila in the front office on that aspect of it, fine, I'll agree. But you got to understand where it started and where it came from and why it is what it is. And at least they picked a direction and have stayed with it. Avila is not without blame, but Dave Dombrowski is not without blame either for why they're still sucking the way they are in 2022. And you know something? They have to be better next year, and if they're not, then I will be on that Al Avila train. They have to make a change because you don't go and draft this much talent since 2016 and not at least be an above 500 team next year, because this offseason is the most crucial offseason in the entirety of this rebuild, because they need to start winning ball games next year because clocks have started, players have graduated from prospect status, and guys are about to be here. That are here that are about to be everyday contributors or are everyday contributors. So next year is this offseason, how the Tigers spend, the moves they make. You know, it's going to be ginormously pivotal, because if they have another clunker next year and they're as bad as they are this year as they are if they would be next year, then that's when I think you would have to make a change, because you have now been the GM since full-time since 2016. You now have a majority of your prospects that your big guys have now graduated up to the major league level. You need to start winning ball games. This year, I think, has been so much of a fluke because you have literally 4 of the worst hitters in all of Major League Baseball in your lineup. You've had so many injuries. You've gone through 14 starting pitchers, you know. But at least their bullpen's good, and their rookie prospects are making it to the major leagues and they're contributing. You know, or they're putting some kind of an impact on the team in some kind of way, small or large. It doesn't matter. They're still contributing, and they're able to fill roles even with injuries. But this offseason is ginormously huge. And if they don't start winning next year, that is when I would get on the Avila train of he needs to go, because you don't get a chance to draft all these guys and put all these pieces in place and win another 65-win season next year, because that you've had enough time, you've had enough chances. But rebuild has not been 7 years. The rebuild has been 4 years. 4 years this month, because they were supposed to be competitive in 16. They were supposed to be competitive in 17, and it wasn't until July of 17 where they finally went into full-blown rebuild mode and tore down the house. So quit saying 7 years. It hasn't been 7 years. It's been since July of 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It's been 5 years, not 7 years. And you got to understand the prospects traded away, that Dave Dombrowski traded away, the situation he put Al Avila in, all the crap Al Avila had to dig out, how bad the farm system was, how he's restocked the farm system, drafted a lot of good players. You know, that's why they're as bad as they are. And like I said, Avila's not without his fault. And I hope in this video I came across neutral as I could about that. I'm not saying that he's without blame. He has made crappy trades. He has had crappy contracts, like this Javier Baez contract, and Erod's looking, you know, not great so far. He's not even on the team. But, you know, I didn't want them to even sign Javier Baez, but that's a whole nother video, a whole nother story. Understand the timeline. Understand where it came from, where it is, what has happened so far. That's all I got to say. So, I'll be back next week with another video to talk about the Tigers. At the 81 game mark, we're going to do an 81 game season review. So that should be fun, and get to talk about how crappy they've been. Have a good one, guys. Go Tigers.